Welcome everyone to today's webinar with Kurt Kelley. So first of all, I'd like to thank Kurt for his time today and preparing his slides and sharing his expertise with the attendees in today's webinar. Thanks, Kurt, for coming. Kurt is the CEO of Accelerated Technology Consulting, which is really focused on supporting your organization through the transition of transformation, leveraging the Internet of Things, whether you're a small startup or you're a Global 500. So thanks, Kurt, for taking the time to prepare as well as taking the hour out of your day to share your thoughts, insight with everyone. And before I hand it off to Kurt, I will just give an introduction for any of you that are sitting in today that don't have experience with interfacing. Interfacing is just hosting the event for Kurt. And we are a global software and service provider with over 25 years experience and really focused on process-based solutions. Starting off in the early 90s with a process modeling and simulation engine, through to an add-on into Visio in late 90s, through to today, which is really our key flagship product, is the Enterprise Process Center, which has been recognized for many years as a leader by Gartner in multiple quadrants. Some of the older ones like Enterprise Business Process Analysis, through to the latest ones of topics like business operating systems and digital twin, which is really aligned with today's topic, having to do with solutions that support transformation, as well as solutions that can be leveraged for automation and digitization. We also have extended the solution through into GRC, if anyone's coming from more of a governance, risk, and compliance background, as well as have been recognized as a leader in knowledge management, which is also another big hot topic right now, since we are one of the first and still today the best recognized central repository-based solutions where you can standardize on not only your processes, but your documents, your risks, your KPIs, objectives, roles and responsibilities, so on and so forth. So just a quick snapshot of the Enterprise Process Center and its different modules, purposes, and really the platform. So as the solution evolved through the years, we are currently on V11. V10 was really the next generation of our platform once again. So we continue to invest heavily, right? The V5, the V10, our latest technology, mobile, cloud-based, really an enterprise-based solution, but can be leveraged for a single user or for 100,000 users within a larger enterprise. So the concept of our solution is really providing one central repository for standardizing all of your information for collaboration, training, continuous improvement, change management, leveraging it for blueprinting of your to-be state, whether this be for actually clarifying the process, clarifying the business rules at every step, clarifying the new requirements when you get into digitization, and really being able to map your customer's journey and the touch points across your different business processes and how that will change with digitization, and being able to map all the way down to the more technical side if you want to go down to the metadata, the systems, right, the backbone that supports the services that support your operations. And of course, then putting in controls against ongoing governance, being able to be agile and continuously improve, but also more around putting the governance controls of who can change what, when, why, and all the audit trails behind that and assessing the risk of those changes. And the other portion of our platform, of our suite, is really the digital business platform. And this really ties in with today's subject of Internet of Things, since we really connect into the different products that, whether that be your smart refrigerator or your smart TV, so on and so forth. All these products are now communicating. So we are the back office, call it, of those products that can trigger tasks to then automate everything that goes around your business and connecting it into the different products and actually collecting all that data and leveraging the data. So that has everything to do with low-code rapid application development, of actually automating those processes, through to testing them, through to rolling them out, monitoring, and improving them. So that's it for me. I'm going to really pass the baton to Kurt. Kurt, thanks for coming once again today. And for all of you out there that are looking into the Internet of Things or within a current transformation program, obviously his company could really help you with that. Just before handing it off, I'll just put a couple of polls. So if everyone could just indicate your level of knowledge of IoT today, and I'll share these results with Kurt so we can just get a bit of a better understanding of who the audience is and their experience with IoT. So we can see here about 40% are in that 20 to 40 range. And just one more before he starts his presentation. Which of you have started a digital transformation within your organization already? I know many companies really have that 2020 program in place and started a couple of years back, but from what we've experienced is there's been delay after delay in terms of actually getting to the point of implementation. So what we can see here that 14% are in that 80 to 100 versus 40% in that, again, in that 20 to 40 range. So if you're in that 20 to 40 range, you're not alone. So Kurt, I'll pass it off to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. And it's my pleasure and honor to be here with you guys today. And thank you for the poll, because that's one of the things that kind of sets up the talk for today. So with that, just a very brief background of myself and why I'm here today. So the last 20 plus years, I've been in the telecom and technology space, mainly focused around connectivity of people, places, and now eventually things. And so these things that have come into our daily lives and routines have become a very powerful way of either conducting business or else improving quality of life in some form or another. So I'm sure that everybody on the webinar so far has had, well, I know you've had interaction with IoT, whether you realize it or not. So all the way from paying for your gas at the pump with credit card transaction, all the way to Fitbits and all those things in between. So whether we believe it or not, connected devices are around us every day. And so there's a lot of numbers that that we can throw out there, but main purpose and point of today is to show you the relevancy of IoT during the time of digital transformation and kind of what it does for your business. So if you'll allow me just a couple of minutes, we'll go through the presentation, and usually we like to do this as a very interactive audience and environment. So please feel free to ask the questions throughout the presentation, so that we have something to come back and give you the information that you're seeking during this time. So be of good value for everyone. So with that, let's do just a brief history. So it's not a surprise that the 20 to 40% range was the majority for knowledge of IoT, because there's still a lot of unknowns as to what it really is. So after today, you will at least have that understanding and knowledge of what IoT is. And once you do, don't be surprised whenever you start seeing it all around you every day. So it's like the thought process, I want to go buy a car, and you choose that you want to go buy a red car, but you typically don't see red cars on the highway until you make the decision to go buy a red car. And then all of a sudden they're everywhere around you. And it's because of the area of focus. So we're going to bring IoT into focus today, if you'll allow me. So just a brief history, just to kind of show you that this is not anything new or a new way of thinking. We go all the way back to 1926 with everybody's favorite person on the planet, Nikola Tesla. Whenever he was really forward thinking in his thought processes, and of course everybody in 1926 thought he was absolutely out of his mind. Whenever he made this statement, the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared to our present telephone. because back then telephones were extremely complex. So the thought process that, just a wireless opportunity, they were experimenting, with things from an electrical standpoint. And, obviously there were a lot of failures during that time, but then there was also the successes that we'll talk about. But just being a forward-thinking person that he was, it was, hey, we're going to simplify this over time, and it might not even be in my lifetime, but this is what I see coming. So, we fast forward, however many years later, almost an entire century later, and and now we're seeing all those things come to fruition. And by 2026, at that 100-year mark of this statement, without question, there will be just an exorbitant number of these wireless devices proliferate in our daily lives. So let's take a look back. Where did all this start? Where did it come from? So we talked about the telephone. So 1876. I mean, that's like almost incomprehensible for a lot of people to think back that far. That it's kind of where it all started, if you will, from how do we communicate outside of just a voice communication, and how do we do something that's long distance. So you look back, 1876. Obviously, Graham Bell and all the fun people that were involved with that invention. But it wasn't until 1969 that we kind of started seeing what's next. So, there was a major gap in time. So for anyone on the audience, anyone in the audience that knows about ARPANET or have heard about it in the past, it was a project that was put together and funded by the government in order to be the first network that was set up between different locations. And so there were 4 different universities. Stanford and UCLA were 2 of those that were connected to one another. But just the thought process that just that short amount of time ago, 40 years ago, that I'm sorry, a little bit further than that. Math is not my strong suit. So, back in 1969, just that short amount of time back is whenever we're first looking at how do we connect one location to another location via a network. Whatever data was being transmitted back and forth during that time. But then another great jump happens whenever we get all the way to 1995. And it's whenever Siemens decided that they were going to dedicate an entire business unit to building GSM as a type of cellular technology. And so they wanted to put together this machine-to-machine, which is what M2M stands for. And they wanted to put together this GSM module. So how do we take and make something cellularly enabled so that it can connect to one place or another, and to do so, with meaning. So one machine speaking to another machine. And so in 95, Siemens they were really at the forefront of their thought processes. So we kind of look back at the Nikola Tesla and see how far ahead he was. Siemens was kind of in that same boat, and we see the value. How do we capitalize on this and do something with it? And so applaud them for actually putting the business unit together and the staff to be able to pull this off. And then we fast forward just a short amount of time later. As you can see, the timelines are getting shorter and shorter as we go through this. So in 1999, a gentleman by the name of Kevin Ashton was actually with the MIT Auto ID Center. And that was during a presentation to Procter & Gamble. It was actually a sales presentation. During that presentation is whenever he mentioned, we'll just call it the Internet of Things, because everybody was still trying to figure out how do we put, what do we call this stuff? How do we handle this? And so the term was coined in 1999. So I say that to put things in perspective, that we still have on the audience or in the audience, and I find this wherever I go. So this is not specific to this audience, but there's still a lot of people that don't know what IoT is. And so, so even though it's been around since '99, we still have a long way to go with the education and the exposure as to what all this is going to do for us long term. And so then in 2017, so we go from '99 where it's a concept, it's a thought process, and now in this past year, according to IHS Corporation, we've got 20.35 billion IoT devices now connected. And that number has obviously exponentially grown since then, just in 2018. So, platforms that are out there today, we hear all kinds of numbers, from 20,000, 30,000, 100,000 units that are being connected to the network on a monthly basis. And so whenever you look at the broad scope and you hear the really big numbers of 50 billion devices being connected by 2020, you get into the multiplication factor. And so that's what we're starting to see right now. So the adoption curve is drastically facing straight up and down at the moment. And honestly, I don't foresee that changing anytime in the near future. And so what do we do with all this? What does all this mean, and what's it going to do for our businesses is really kind of what I want to focus on now. So what is the IoT, and what is it that we're going to be really diving into? So a lot of different definitions that you can find across the internet. Everybody has, their way of framing it up and talking about it. But according to the IEEE, and this is actually a changing definition based on as we come to grow and learn more about what it is that we do. But what I want to point out is the things that have sensing or actuation and potential programmability capabilities. So, and through the exploration of unique identification, sensing information about the thing can be collected, and the state of the thing can be changed from anywhere, anytime, anything. So in a prior life, I was working for a carrier, and we always, had the thought process, we want to connect anything, anywhere, anytime. And the purpose behind that, I'm sure if we could see the audience's hands, and I asked you if you had a programmable, thermostat that you could connect to remotely, a lot of you would raise your hands. If you have some kind of a security camera within your home, you'd probably raise your hands. And then also, if you have some kind of a fitness tracking device that you wear on your wrist, you'd probably raise your hands as well. And so how do we translate this into bringing value, and what does an end-to-end solution look like? So let's take just a couple of seconds and walk through that. What is the anatomy of a solution? Because this really puts things in context. So first of all, we have to start with the device. And the device is some form of a sensor that has a collection of, a range of different things, from temperature, humidity, light, location, proximity, vibration, and even metering. So I'm sure now that we've kind of uncovered what all these things do, that you can start thinking about connected devices around your everyday life. And so whenever we look at temperature, so let's think about whenever you're within an environment and you want to automatically control the temperature based on the number of occupants, based on the temperature that's outside, based on even the uses of that particular room. So if you have a large building and you have 30 different rooms, and several of those are conference rooms that only get used once or twice a day, what's the purpose of actually refrigerating them or giving them heat and AC whenever they're not being occupied? And so there's a lot of different integrations. I love the fact that whenever Scott was talking about all the different areas that interfacing is pulling data into from their platform perspective. So you can start thinking about whenever you schedule a meeting within Outlook or whatever other scheduling program you use, that if you have occupancy sensors, light sensors, and then temperature and humidity, and you're actually looking at the schedule of the day, and you have meetings that are from 10 to 11 like this one, or 11 to 12 depending on your time zone, and then you don't have another one until 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and you've got weather station data being pulled in from a feed from whatever your source is, why should I continue to let the AC run within the conference room whenever there's not going to be anyone in there using it? So it's things like that that we have to start thinking through. So your business processes, are being driven by your intelligence now. So now everything that's around you has the ability to interoperate with one another for a purpose. And that purpose we'll get to in just a few minutes with the benefit statement. So next is connectivity. And there's a broad range of different types of connectivity. There's fixed line, which I'm sure everyone in their home has some form of a broadband connection. whatever type of connection that is. And then you've got cellular, obviously. I would say probably 100% of the people attending this have a cell phone in their pocket. And then you've also got Wi-Fi. All of those have inherent pros and cons depending on the solution, and that's kind of what we help people understand and determine whenever they're bringing something to market. But then there's a whole other category of ways of connecting as well. So, just to name some, you've got Zigbee and Bluetooth and Z-Wave, and then you've got the low power networks like LoRa and Sigfox, and multiple different ways of doing this connectivity. And they're strategic. So it depends on what type of solution it is, how much information you're trying to push back and forth as to what's going to be the right thing for your business. And then the data. So it's got to go somewhere. Obviously, whenever we're looking at interfacing's platform, they're going to be taking on the data and, either whatever their configuration is, on-prem cloud device. But then what do we do with the data? Just because we have data doesn't mean that it actually has value. So then we look at analytics. So how do we make that data useful for us so that we can either look at historical trends, we can look at what's currently happening today, or we can look at tomorrow. And so whenever we look at, predictive and prescriptive analytics, it's, based on the history of how this machine was acting, are there things that we could do in order to increase its efficiency and stop using so much electricity? Because sometimes it's just the bearing or the bushing that's getting worn out in a motor that's causing more drag and using more electricity. And so there's all kinds of fun things that we can pull out of the analytics once we have the data. So the sensor goes all the way back to the sensor. If we don't have the sensor, then we don't have the data, which gives us the intelligence to make a change. But then we get into the application. So are we using this for some form of a business intelligence about what we're doing? And how do we use that from a strategy perspective going forward, or even in our business process management? So these are things that people are starting to look at now in order to change their processes later down the road to become more efficient in the marketplace. And then the user interface. This is the one that is really what I would consider the most important, because I know everyone on the call that's downloaded an app before that it didn't have a good user interface. It wasn't easy to use. It probably took you less than 30 seconds to uninstall that app, right? So the user interface is something that is critical to understand your potential client. So you being the client as the business owner, if those things are not meeting your needs, we tend to use what works the easiest, and that's just by human nature. So if something's easy and intuitive to use, we'll use it. If it's not, then we tend to kind of push it off to the side. Even though it can be something that helps us generate more revenue, there's still the challenge of how do I interact with this? So it's something to keep in mind at all times. Especially if you're a company and you're looking at applications or development houses to build something, make it very well known what your desires are as a user interface in order to make it make sense, right? And so what are we looking at from a transformation perspective? First of all, let's just do a very high level. So digital transformation, boiled down in its purest sense, is nothing more than taking current businesses and digitizing them in some form or another. So how do we transform? So just as Scott mentioned earlier, they're on V11 of their platform. So that means that there were all these different iterations from V1 or wherever they started all the way to V11. And each time there was a transformation of what they were trying to accomplish. There was an end goal in sight. So we're going to add this feature product set, we're going to add this service, because we're getting the request from the customer. So if it makes sense and it's for the greater good of our entire customer base, then it's something that we're going to look at making in the next iteration. And so, just because you start with a great business model doesn't mean that you end with the same one 10 or 15 years from now. Well, I can guarantee you it's not going to be because of how rapidly business is changing. So another benefit to using IoT is you're actually collecting the data that tells you what your customers are not telling you. So let's just use, for instance, if you have a sensor on a person that's going home for physical therapy that just got out of an operation, and their cast has a sensor, or in their brace has a sensor in it, which this is being done today, you can make sure that they're working their limb out, whether it be their arm or their leg, their neck, whatever. You can make sure that there's an accountability. So now I have a sensor that's tracking your range of motion. It's making sure that you're doing your exercises. And it's not a big brother thing. It's to help you become better. Because sometimes, you know, I can tell you, as having a wife that's had knee replacement surgery, it's very difficult to go through that process and continue to endure the pain in the post-therapy. So whenever you're going through all your therapeutic recovery part of it, you've got to push yourself to another limit in order to be able to endure the pain for the healing process to be proper. So, you know, all these sensors, I know a lot of people have different conceptions, you know, about how we're using this to watch what people are doing. And really, if you boil it down at the end, number one, people don't have enough time in their day to worry about what other people are doing. The reality is that a lot of these applications and solutions are out there to be able to affect change and in its truest sense, a transformation of the way you do business. So if anyone's in the service business and you do work orders and you have people that are going out and servicing equipment, whether it be heating and AC, refrigeration, you know, plumbers, I mean, there's a plethora of different solutions that we can look at. But if you look at the old way of doing it, where you wrote everything down on a piece of paper, but the person that was doing the work is not the one that's going to be entering it into the billing system to create the invoice to get paid, how many times, if we're honest with ourselves, how many times do we take that paperwork back to the office, and if something is not legible, it doesn't get charged for, right? And so there's lost revenue as well. And so there's a lot of things that you can capture just by digitizing. So now I'm gonna go back to the user interface and why that's so important. If it's not easy to use, then you're gonna have complications. But if you make it something that's easy to use, then now you have, your supply chain becomes more efficient, all the way from the work being done to the invoice being sent to the customer. And by the way, let's also look at digital transformation, because we no longer send paper invoices, but we send things through email. And we also give them the ability to pay it with a credit card online. So there's all these different integrations that take place, that all of a sudden now you've got all this lost time, lost revenue that's found simply because we implemented technology. And so that's really kind of the major story and point that I want to make there. So what are some of the benefits? We've mentioned quite a few already, but just to kind of hammer it, there's two things that will affect the bottom line of a business. Now, everything that's above the bottom line, obviously there's different ways of handling that, but there's only two things that affect the change. And it's to either reduce expenses or to increase revenue. It's your choice. And so most people take the approach that I'm going to use this to reduce expenses, you know, efficiency. So lean, you know, the lean model, the Six Sigma model, the Lean Six Sigma model, there's all these different things that you do to reduce complexity and make it more efficient and make it repeatable over time. There's only so much you can do to reduce an expense, right? I mean, I think we all know that. You can go from, you know, eating at a really nice steakhouse on a per diem to, you know, eating something that is more like a fast casual concept. You know, so obviously there's a reduction in expenses. But the fact of the matter is you still have to eat when you're traveling, right? So there's only so much that you can do to reduce the expenses. So the next thing, and this is really where it gets me a little bit more excited, is increasing the revenue. Now, you can do that in multiple different ways. You can do that either by offering new services, or you can do it by digitizing the current services that you have in process today. So just as the example we used just a second ago with the supply chain side, that would be something that makes your revenue increase because of efficiency, right? So we're doing both at the same time. So we're reducing the paperwork and the handwriting. I read a statistic just the other day about the amount of time that doctors take putting stuff on charts. I mean, literally just writing down the information on charts. It's like 50% of their time to do their documentation. And so now it's obviously that's a big red flag. How do we increase the efficiency of physicians to make their life easier for their documentation? And in doing so, you also have the ability to increase lost revenue. So I say lost revenue because time is, I don't like the equation time equals money, because time can never be replaced, but you can always make more money. So what I would like to say is you get more time in order to exponentially increase your revenue, right? So increase of revenue, new services, there's a lot of different interesting case studies that we could talk about there. I would say the most interesting that I'm most recently involved with is how to take a common everyday thing like a gym and put a digital transformation spin on a gym in order to collect additional information and data and turn that into another revenue stream. So think about this as services you're already doing and products you're already offering. But if you went that next step further, how much more you would be able to monetize that. So if you offer a product and there's no reoccurring revenue on the product, then think about, how do I make that a connected device and add a service to it? It is a lot more simplistic. I don't want to understate. There are complexities, yes, but there's also platforms out there similar to interfacings that they make life easier during that transition to where at least you can do a proof of concept. So it doesn't always take a major overhaul. Sometimes it's a very easy undertaking that you can do a 30-day trial, 60-day trial, and and see what the numbers look like for yourself. So above and beyond that, let's go to improve safety. So within manufacturing, that's becoming a really big issue now, both with our first responders that, because of budget cuts, we have them out there on the streets by themselves. So how do we put sensors on their bodies or within their vehicles or environment to be able to monitor what's going on around them? So if there's some form of danger or harm that's inevitable, that we can automatically dispatch. So the heavy risk there. The other thing I will look at on improved safety is manufacturing. So we still have, thankfully manufacturing we have a lot that's coming back to the U.S., which we're really excited about there. But with that, you've got people that are walking around in hard hats that, I'm sorry, but if you get hit on the top of a head with, a 2-ton product that's hanging above you with a crane, a hard hat's not going to help you do anything other than identify the spot on the ground. So, it's how do we make sure that the people within the environment are staying safe? So if, fall detection is a big one. So if somebody happens to trip and fall, if someone gets hit by something, there's a lot of different sensors that we can utilize to improve people's safety within their working environments. And then last, obviously, the new business models. So I think we've discussed that pretty well. Looking forward to questions around that, specifically around your business, and if you have some thought processes around what you can do. So with that, let's jump into just a couple of more slides. Hang in there with me, and we'll be through in just a minute. So companies that are currently active in IoT. This is a study that was done by a friend of mine, James Brim and Associates, and they've, out of all the people that they identified, reached out to for the survey, 73% of these businesses are actually active in IoT. So doing something, whether it's just taking a look at it, if they're actually implementing it, and they're going through those phases. And the second one is 60% of those are aiming to grow revenue and profits. So another thing, so we talked about the profits. I would call that the lost revenue, because you're increasing your profit margin. So 60% of those, that's their aim and their main goal. And then last, 50% are looking for downtime reduction with predictive maintenance. So if you have heavy machinery, if you have, actually, as Scott said earlier, with connecting your appliances. I know that used to sound really far-fetched. Why would I want to connect my toaster? But if you think about all the things that you can integrate into that, so let's use the coffee maker for an example. The connected coffee maker, I can remember back in the day whenever the timers started coming out on coffee makers, and it was so amazing to me that I could put my coffee together in the morning or at night before I went to bed and set the timer for it to automatically brew it, and it would be ready whenever I got downstairs. That was phenomenal to me. That was also 20 plus years ago. So now it's how do I make that a connected appliance and have it to be able to interface with other appliances. So once the coffee's made, then I'm going to trigger the oven, whatever the case may be, to start working on my toast, whatever it is. So there's a lot of different things that we look at that we dismiss that actually would be an increase of quality of life. So predictive maintenance is going to be a really big deal of, how do we determine whenever the washer or the dryer is about to go out. If anybody has ever had a hot water heater go out on them, obviously that's a really big mess to clean up and something to pay attention to. So how do we monitor, even hot water heaters? And the thing that's so cool about this, these sensors are not overly expensive. So they're not cost prohibitive. And so that's the reason why they're really starting to take place, outside of the cellular side, but, kind of in the home network side of things, that we're starting to see an uptick, in that area. And so, what's the landscape look like? So just some key markets and some different solutions. These are things that I personally see happening, very high level. And so within manufacturing and distribution, the automation is really the big key right now. So how do we automate these processes? And I think that we've all seen what happens, on the automation side with Amazon, on the distribution piece of it. Manufacturing is going through the same kind of transitions. And then oil and gas and utilities, obviously the monitoring and the metering. So, instead of paying somebody to just drive around in a truck, let's repurpose that person for, something that's a little bit more productive than just walking around with a meter reader, right? And so that's becoming a really, really big market for those guys. And then within healthcare, it's real-time feedback. So within its limits, obviously you can't use a wearable in order to give you a diagnosis, but you can use the data from a wearable to start helping you shape maybe a story that's not being understood. So as a person that goes and has blood work done every quarter, that's one of the things I sit down with my nurse practitioner about, and we just have discussions. So it's like from quarter to quarter, I know what's going on within my body and how to optimize, my nutrition, my uptake and things like that. And so having some form of a real-time feedback is a really big deal to us for proactive health and preventative health. So a lot of things happening. Retail is a disaster that is really going through a lot of transformation right now. And part of that, and I would say the largest piece of that, is how do we personalize the experience within a store environment? So online shopping has become the new way of doing business for the most part, specifically within the Americas, or in North America, I would say. So how do we personalize that experience from a human-to-human experience to bring them back into the storefronts? And so we're seeing all kinds of things happen there. So whenever I talked earlier about proximity sensors, to where whenever you get within a certain range of something, I'm offering you a discount, a coupon, I'm telling you something about the product that you're staring at. There's just a lot of things happening right there. And so a lot more to come on that. And then with transportation logistics, I'm not familiar enough with the way the Canadian logistics system works with your postal office, but here in America, there's been a trend where I can start watching whenever I buy something that I can see where multiple carriers, even like the U.S. Postal Office and UPS, partnering together and sharing data back and forth, so that I can even see whenever those handoffs have happened, and it's reducing a lot of cost for them. So instead of them doing the last mile, they just get it to the major hub, and then they hand it over to, a lesser expensive route to be able to do that last mile to the delivery of the home. So a lot of very interesting things happening in logistics. And then smart cities, I think that everybody's, for the most part, probably heard the term. We're still trying to understand the true definition, and I think that will continue to change over time as we learn more and more about what can be done. But the quality of life really kind of is the main goal. So how do we become good stewards of tax money? how do we, implement something that increases quality of life for the residents of a city and also even attract new ones. So, I was just telling Scott earlier, we've got approximately 500 families that are moving to the Dallas-Fort Worth area every month. You start thinking about 500 families a month. My first question is, where are they coming from and what's happening to the cities that they're leaving? And so, this is something that is a really big topic for, for the cities and even towns. So it's gone below, the city framework down to the town framework, and to see, what is it that we can do to increase life? If somebody left just because there wasn't, enough green space for a park, if somebody left because the air quality wasn't as good as it is in another place, and it's understanding how do we become better at servicing our clients, whether you're a city or a business. And that's really kind of the name of the game, and really to my, to my definition, the purpose of doing digital transformation, and especially with the utilization of IoT to do so. So with that, I want to thank everybody for their attention. I know that was, kind of a very high-level brief overview, and more than happy to answer questions within this forum, as well as offline. So my contact information is there. Obviously, interfacing being your first point of contact, and let's see what we can do to help help each other out. And so Scott, I'll turn it back over to you, and let's see what we can do for questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Kurt. It was a great insight. A couple of things I definitely connected with when you're talking about air conditioning within housing. Well, actually, we were talking around conference rooms, but I've seen the same thing with people with large mansions whereby, the West Wing, they don't cool at all because it's hardly ever used. And even though they're lucky to have such a size house, for them too, to spend $100,000 in cooling when they're two people living in the right side of the house, as well as down to other friends of mine who constantly traveling on business and they're only home in their actual house for a week, a month. So after they land in their flight, automatically, right, they can, from, like you said, adjust their temperature from their phone. Two examples too I wanted to throw in based on the examples you brought up that really, connected with me, where I think everyone needs to think, how can you leverage Internet of Things for your business? And often they're thinking it's outside of the realm of their business. So two things, examples they're close to me. One, I just went to the C2 conference. I don't know, those of you out there, it's a very innovative, next forward-looking conference. And everyone, in terms of their badges, right? Everyone back in the day, their badges were just simply printed with your name and your barcode, and you'd have to scan people as they go in and out of different speaking events to ensure that they signed up for it. So yes, that's a small value of digitizing that, whereby when I walk up to that door automatically based on proximity, wireless and Bluetooth, they can actually immediately see, okay, yes, you save a bit of time, I can go straight into the room. But think of the value to the customer. One, we just simply connect our badges and immediately I capture other attendees. So for networking purposes, digitizing has given a value to the customer that they'll remember that before they'd have to get business cards, or if you're someone who's actually sponsoring, you need to, buy one of those scanners. What if you're 20 people at the booth? Bob has a scanner, and sometimes you'll meet outside. So now being able to connect and collect information very easily for the customer. But I think what everyone misses on this is the benefit to C2. Now they know exactly every person, every event they went to, and on top of that, they track you as you move around the event. It's such a big event that they'll see for next year, this speaker was hot, or everyone hung out by the burger station all day, to that degree, right? Where they see the movement and then they trace that and they see what was successful things that they did and what were not successful things, and the patterns of people moving for throughputs. And the other example I want to give is very much on the regulated side. So think of one that's digitizing a conference, which whoever thought of that, And then two, think in healthcare where we have a customer, I have to say their name, Omnicell, because it's incredible what they've done. I've seen their technology. Is as we were talking about Internet of Things, for your house, they applied the same thing to hospitals, whereby they created vending machines that control the drug disbursement. So it's incredible what they've done, where they say now, um, think of depending on your security, a technician may only have access to rubber gloves versus let's say a doctor, right, who has access to drugs, and nurses maybe somewhere in between. So yes, it's to control around security, but more importantly, it's to improve, again, the customer, meaning improve quality of care. Now, by simply tagging that individuals, meaning the patient's wristband, it disperses the correct drug, meaning no, not making errors and giving the wrong drugs, and two, the correct dosage automatically, which is incredible. But then I always take it back again to think back office. And that's where I would say where we come in, where that's improving quality care, it's security. But back office is now you can automate the entire supply chain because at any point in time exact amount of drug you have in your hospital and the trends at which you're going through certain drugs or other materials and automatically reorder to the vendors before you run out. And then, right, you have speed and costing all the back office value. So I think everyone should take a hard look at their business and digitization and one, how it improves the customer, and two, how it could save you in the back in terms of automation, speed to compete. So I'll leave it at that, and let's open it up to some questions, which I have a couple here that popped up. For one, someone asked, where do we start? So you're a consultant, they said, day one, month one, year one. So I think that's common in many major programs. What would be your recommendations, Kurt?
Yeah, first of all, is I would say start simple. There's the thought process of what we call proof of concept or minimal viable product. So just to give you an example, we're doing something right now. Whenever I was telling you earlier about digitization within this GEM environment. And so it's, out of the ultimate goal, which is where we want to go, not everyone has the revenue or the funding to be able to do everything at once. So it's what is that one thing that's going to make the greatest impact and be the least expensive to do? And I'll kind of use the Jeff Bezos thought process here of whenever he was looking at what is Amazon and what is it going to do. The thought process was what infrastructure already exists today that I can leverage in order to move things around. And so he didn't get into the logistics side of things until much later in the game because he was utilizing, the post office and FedEx and UPS and all the other avenues that he had access to. So all he had to do was determine what it is that is not being moved around that way. And so that's what caused him to choose books. And so whenever you're trying to decide where to start, that would be my initial is what is something that already exists today that you could use as a proof of concept. So if it's something that you want to track attendance, there's plenty of inexpensive ways of doing that through NFC, RFID, where you can start tracking attendance versus a time clock, or it's getting even crazier now where we're using video analytics to do facial recognition and there's nothing involved. You just walk in the building and you're clocked in and clocked out. So I would look at, like I said, the simplistic, there's a lot of what we call low-hanging fruit, which would be what gives you an ROI, prove out the concept, and then take it a step further, from there. But I would say always have an end goal in mind so that you have the expectations set properly up front.
Someone brought up a question. Working in the service industry, how will Internet of Things drive our industry to engage with and learn more about our customers? I think that's a good question because I always feel people in the service industry often feel that they're different. I hear it all the time. So maybe you can chime in on that.
Absolutely. So I'll give you an example that it's funny. It fits into the service industry, but in a very specific way. I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about going and eating in a restaurant. And whenever you think about the service industry, I was a waiter way many years ago, and during college. And one of the things that I always looked at was how do I make my customers' experience better? And so it was learning more about my customer as the night went on, table system, but what would have happened if I had known ahead of time? So I mean, this was not a high-end restaurant. It was, it was a Tex-Mex restaurant. So there was, anything like, that day. So I had to pull all that information on my own. But what if I knew ahead of time based on the booking? And so there's something to be said about being able to build a relationship with a customer or a client. There's a lot to be said about that, because people do business with people, not necessarily with companies. And so the more you know about your customer ahead of time and the things that are going on, the more easier the transaction is going to be with them. So, his comment was there was a little frustration because service was, under, less than desirable. And so the conversation that he had with the waiter was, which I applaud him for having the ability to do this, but it was, do you understand the reason why I come in? And and it got to the point where it was, I come into a restaurant in order to not just receive food, because I can go to any restaurant and receive food, but if I go to a restaurant that has a wait staff, I'm here because I want to be served. And so what is it that allows you to go above and beyond all the other servers within that restaurant that makes you want to go back and see that person the next time, because that was part of your experience? So service industry, I know that you might feel like the stepchild here, but no, that is very much so a huge part of Internet of Things. And I would say as much intelligent gathering that you can do through sensors, the better your interaction and retention is going to be. So repeat customers are better than one-time customers. I think we can all agree on that.
We have a very broad question here, so maybe not sure how you can narrow it down a bit, but how about 5G, Internet of Things, and autonomous vehicles? So
yeah, that's really broad. And I think that a lot of the 5G and IoT, we're still trying to figure out what that is going to look like. I think that everybody's trying to find their way. There's a lot of different people that have different opinions, and so that's a hornet's nest that I'm gonna kind of just tap just a little bit, but I'm gonna back off just because we don't really know what's going to happen. The purpose behind 5G is to really be connected anywhere, anytime, and also have the bandwidth to do anything that is needed or necessary. So we'll put that in the context of autonomous vehicles. So here in Frisco, Texas, we actually, Driver AI just is launching a program, and it's really a lot of conversation and talk is happening around it, because now for the first time here right in our backyard, we're going to have autonomous vehicles. And so the concern happens whenever you see the news and the crashes that have taken place is who's at fault and where's the responsibility lie. And so I think that we still have a long way to go, not on it happening and becoming a real thing, but on how to implement it within our current everyday surroundings. So just like at CES, we saw the autonomous vehicle or the autonomous shuttles. I think shuttling in a controlled environment is a fantastic idea, especially around stadiums and things like that. Putting them out on the road, I think we still have quite a few years ahead of us before that becomes a safe reality.
Maybe based off that too, you talked at one point during your session the different technologies to leverage, Bluetooth versus Wi-Fi. Any guidance or high-level rules? Because you said depends on the use case.
Yeah.
Any rule of thumb?
Yeah, I would say that there's really a couple of different that come to mind. Number one, security is always top of mind. So you've got security. Interoperability is another big one. So understanding, end to end, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and having the right specs. Because, so let's say NFC, which, the tap to pay, whether it's a credit card or your phone, that type of technology is not going to work if you're trying to capture attendance from people just walking in the door, because the range is not there. So it's kind of understanding what the policy is. So everything has pros and cons. I would say on top of that, we've seen several solutions where they use multiple radios in one device, but then you have the battery life that becomes a challenge. And so, so security, knowing what it is end to end that you're trying to accomplish, to make sure that the length of the radio or the transmission of the radio, and then also the battery life, depending on if you have to use multiple modules or not.
I always thought when they came out with that tap to pay a bit comical, because originally, right, we swiped and to pay, and then they said this is too insecure. So they put the chips, the pins. Now you have to enter your pin. And someone said, "Hey, I have this awesome technology that you don't need to put your pin anymore. You can just tap to pay." I was just like, we were there before, where we just swipe.
Yeah, and now whenever, depending on if you have, well, so it's funny because some of the tap to pay you also have to put a pin in.
Yeah,
So
right.
it's tap to pay because, and you have to put it in because somebody could have, it could be a stolen device. So yeah, a lot of interesting things happen in there. Biometrics plays into that one as well.
I think one thing you touched on that everyone leaving with another message is, it's what do you do with the data, and useful data. And I think that's where the big company has problems, because they have plummets of amounts of data from the different systems that they've rolled out, but it's unstructured often, and then they're not able to leverage it yet, and they're trying to figure that out. So if you are more of a smaller startup style, make sure keep your data in mind going in, how you want to structure it, and like you said, interoperability, that then you can leverage this for other purposes.
That's right. Always know, I would say anyone that's starting out, ask the question, what is the end result, before you start just throwing money at a solution. Because to your point, you can gather data points all day long, but if it's not useful information that you can pull out of some form of an analytics platform, then you're really just wasting your time. And I think that's kind of giving the IoT industry a little bit of a turned eye, if you will, just because that's happened so much in recent times. Let's just collect all this data. That wasn't. Ask the question going into this: what is my expectation for what I'm going to do? And that helps to set it up. So you talked earlier about clarification, with your platform, and I correlate that with expectation. So yeah.
We've passed the mark of the 1 hour, so I guess we'll wrap it up now. I just want to thank you, Kurt, for your time today. Much appreciated. And everyone on the session, please feel free to reach out to Kurt direct. Absolutely. I mean, he is an expert in Internet of Things, so I support him in his venture. And of course, if you're interested in any more information around interfacing, reach out direct. There is a short form after the session, so we appreciate your feedback. We bring in these experts in their fields, but we want to continuously improve in terms of the webinar quality, topics, and anything else you'd want to hear about in the future. So thanks a lot, Kurt.
Absolutely. Thank you, Scott, for the opportunity.
Take care, everyone.
Morning.
Bye-bye.